Firstly, I want to say thank you everybody for joining this evening. I really appreciate you being here. So my name's Joseph and I'm the Grassland Conservation Officer for Nidderdale National Landscape. And as some of you will know, I work with community groups, landowners, land managers from small projects all the way to multi-field sites looking to help provide advice and resources to manage grasslands better for nature. Part of my portfolio of work is to engage with the local community. So I thought it would be a good idea to run a series of webinars all on grassland management. And a couple of months ago, we kicked it off with a horse health webinar. So grassland management and how that can improve your horse's health. If you want to learn more about that, you can go on our YouTube channel and find a recording there. Last Monday, we ran a webinar on understanding different grassland types across Nidderdale. And that recording's just been put up on YouTube today. So if you want to go and catch up with those old webinars, they're all on our YouTube channel. So I'm going to do a talk for about 45-50 minutes, and then I'll open the floor to questions for the remaining time. If you have a question, you can put it into the chat and I'll get to it at the end, or at the end when it's the Q&A, you can put your virtual hand up or just shout out, pardon me, and we'll get your question asked. Brilliant. So today's webinar, we're going to be learning about creating a species-rich meadow. So if you're going to follow the webinar series, we've learned from the first session, forget the horse health webinar because that was slightly out of the running of things. But we've learned last week about understanding grassland types. How is a grassland formed? What factors shape it? And the different grassland types that come about as a result of all those different factors, whether it be your geology or your aspect or where you are in the country, whether you're in the northwest or the southeast. So we're going to be developing more on looking at meadows. So it's like upland and lowland meadows today, and how we can create some really species-rich, amazing meadows. Without further ado, let's go in. So the contents of the session today. First, you need to understand the suitability of your land. Is your land got the correct soil types, and have you got the correct resources to be able to manage that as a species-rich meadow? If you've not, that's totally fine, and it might mean that just a different habitat type, such as woodland, might be more appropriate for you. Then we're going to learn about the seed you choose. It's very important to choose the right seed for your area. We've got all that sorted. We're going to start to prepare the ground on your site. Then we're going to sow the seeds. And then we're going to talk about ongoing management after that first year of restoration, and the importance of monitoring the changes to see whether you're doing a good job or a bad job. Not necessarily a bad job, but you just might need to slightly change your management, because it's all a learning curve that takes kind of ongoing commitment and observation. So even if it doesn't go right the first year, that doesn't mean it's a complete failure. You've just got to keep trying. So let's go into the suitability of land. And what actually makes a field suitable? Well, the number one point is low soil fertility. You want a low P index, which I'll go into in a little bit more detail in a second, but low soil fertility is really important. Then we need to look at, I call them undesirable species, and that's what the literature says, but weeds, so we're looking at thistles, docks, potentially some ragwort. So we need to ensure those undesirable species aren't running rampant. There might be some pretty nice species already present in your field, and we don't really want any unintended consequences when trying to restore it. So we need to ensure that we've understood our land and know any target species that may already be there. And finally, your ability to manage the land ongoing into the future after that first year's restoration. A meadow is a semi-natural habitat that if you just left with no management in 100 years or so would eventually become a broadleaf woodland. So it's really important that you have some sort of management year on year out to maintain it as a grassland. So they're the kind of four main things we're going to be looking about for the suitability of your land. Right, let's go into a bit more detail on the soil fertility, and especially it being low. So I'm going to lead you through this table here. If you can see, when the phosphorus index is 0 to 1, which means you've got low concentrations of phosphorus in your soil, the chances of successful meadow restoration is at its highest. And if you go down, when you've got a P index of 3 or more, your chances of successful restoration fall dramatically. Now, phosphorus is just a proxy for how fertile your soil is. When you think of soil fertility, you might think of nitrogen. It's quite hard to measure nitrogen in the soil, as it leaches out the soil really quickly with some sort, with rainfall or just natural soil moisture. But phosphorus is a bit more stable and will persist in the soil a bit longer. So that's why we use phosphorus as an index of soil fertility. But nitrogen is a big one as well. That's gonna influence the plant species that are present. So if we look at this graph, what you'll see is as agricultural improvement increases on the x-axis, your opportunity for restoration decreases on the y-axis. And in the top left of this graph is where you're going to have suitable land in terms of soil fertility for restoration. So your agricultural improvement is kind of middling to low, and your opportunity for restoration is the same, middling to low. It doesn't mean that if your agricultural improvement, so your soil fertility is right on the far right of that graph, you can bring it down in time to a level that the opportunity for restoration is suitable. It's worth your time and money. And we'll go into a bit more detail about how to reduce that soil fertility later on in the talk. But that's the number one. You want low soil fertility. So how to reduce the nutrients if they're high? There's a process called nutrient stripping, and there's multiple different ways which you can do this. A number one rule is stop adding fertilizer, whether that be organic fertilizer, so farmyard manure, or inorganic fertilizer, such as tillage. And by stopping adding fertilizer, obviously you're going to stop adding nutrients into the soil, and in years to come, those nutrients will slowly be depleted and decrease. So that's the number one, stop adding your fertilizers. Secondly is to mow and remove vegetation. So every time you're mowing, the grassland and the plants there have put a lot of energy, they're drawing all those nutrients out the soil to grow. And before any of those plants have died and any of those nutrients are reabsorbed back into the soil, you've mown it and you've removed that vegetation. And that's stripping that year's worth of growth in those nutrients from that field, which will slowly reduce the nutrient level, the fertility of the soil. I mean, it sounds kind of, nutrients, I guess in a human context, are quite important. We need nutrients, and it's not that these soils are completely devoid of nutrients, but in a improved or semi-improved grassland, those nutrients are going to be way higher than probably what you would find naturally. So while we're saying removing nutrients, it doesn't mean that your grassland's not going to be healthy, because there's still plenty of nutrients in the soil. It's not just in excess. Now we're getting a little bit more serious now in terms of how to remove that soil fertility. You can do topsoil removal. I would suggest this is more suitable for a garden, a small area. I mean, if you've got like an acre field, you're not removing the topsoil of that. So this option is more for smaller gardens, but you can remove the topsoil, so the first few inches of soil, and you can get some new topsoil added. That's lower fertility. You can do things like inversion mounding, where the subsoil you flip and you put that on top. So the nutrient poor subsoil's on top, and the nutrient rich fertile soil that was originally on top is now underneath. But that's quite drastic, and I don't suggest you need anything like that. Or you can grow a nutrient stripping crop. This is a good technique if you're trying to create a meadow on previously arable land. Say if it was a field that was grown to grow oilseed rape or something like that, and it's really high nutrients, you can grow nutrient stripping crops like potatoes for several years without adding any additional fertilizers, and they're going to draw all the nutrients out that soil before you then go and sow your meadow seed mix to create a permanent grassland at that point. So the bottom two options there are a little bit more drastic, but for a bit smaller scale and kind of general farming scale, you can stop adding your fertilizers, and you can mow and remove vegetation over multiple years. And you just keep testing your soil every summer. Just, after you've mown your vegetation, you've done that all in the summer. Wait till the following spring, do a soil test, see if it's reduced it enough. If it's not, you want to crack it, have another crack over that year, mowing, removing your vegetation, not adding your fertilizers, and do a soil test the next year. So that's fertility. Now this is undesirable species, and the species that classify as such as, so you've got spear thistle is your picture there. You've got docks, thistles, nettles. Nettles are a indicator of high fertility. Ragwort, which can be poisonous to livestock, but also really beneficial to pollinators and invertebrates like the burnet moth and cinnabar moths. Hogweed and cow parsley. So they're the species that classify as undesirable, but there might be some more that are undesirable to you specifically in your context. And these can usually deal with high nutrient levels, so they're great at accessing them. So that's a point. Maybe you've created a lot of bare ground one winter, too many animals in the fields. Well, they can dominate bare ground really quickly as well. And as I mentioned earlier, species like ragwort can be toxic to livestock in high quantities. But how do you remove those undesirable species from your sward? And there are multiple ways. The way I prefer is a mechanical means. And by mechanical, I mean you could mow it, you could pull it, graze it with different livestock. And goats are a really good one, but you've got hardy livestock breeds such as red poles. I think that's a breed of cow, and belted Galloways, things like that. They'll happily munch on undesirable species that probably are more commercial, like a Texel sheep or something would probably leave them alone. But rare native hardy breeds will tackle them. A lot of the landowners I work with, and they've maybe got, an acre, 2 acres, up to 4 acres, they'll go around pulling the undesirable species out by hand or with like a weed popper. This is an important point. You need to control the species as they flower. There's no point coming in and mowing early on in the season let's say about now, because they'll just come back and grow because they've got really good below ground energy stores. So you want to control your undesirable species just as they're flowering or just before they start flowering, because they've put a lot of energy into growing and flowering. And before they seed, you're removing them and you're not adding any additional seed into the seed bank to continue the issue with having undesirable species there. You can use chemical control if it's a really big issue, but I don't recommend that unless it's a large project. Options you can do with chemical, you can do weed wiping, which is you drag it behind the back of a tractor and it's basically a big brush that wipes the herbicide on top of the weeds, which are usually the undesirable species, which are usually taller than the other surrounding vegetation. So you're only applying it to the target species. Another way you can do that is spot spraying using a knapsack, and you can really directly target individual stems of plants you're after. But as I said, chemical, I wouldn't suggest it, and unless it's in your garden, you need to hire a qualified professional to be working with these chemicals. So I had to put it in there, but I don't suggest it for your sorts of projects, I don't think. But you need to remember that these species have really good wildlife value. So you saw all the burnet moss and the cinnabar moss feeding on the ragwort. Thistles, they're quite open, simple flowers that lots of different pollinators, whether they've got a long tongue or a short tongue, can access the nectar resources there. So these species do have wildlife value, and I don't suggest to the complete eradication of these out of your field, because it's just another species to add on your list that you're supporting. If you've got a thistly corner of your field and it's not encroaching out, that's brilliant. But if it starts to encroach further and further, you can start to pull them out and push it back to its original area, as an example. So we've looked at soil fertility and undesirable species. We didn't want to impact any target species. We don't want any unintended consequences. So this picture here is a wax cap, a meadow wax cap. And if these grassland fungi are present, then, if you're harrowing the ground or scarifying it to create that bare ground, which we'll talk about is really important later on, you might want to avoid the areas where you've identified some of these grassland fungi, because you could potentially damage the mycelial networks that live under the ground, and then they won't fruit the following year. It might be that you want to restore your grassland at the time when these are flowering. So adding seed to a grassland to restore a meadow is best done in October. Well, wax caps start to grow in October, and you don't want to start harrowing your field where your wax caps are present, because you could be knocking them and damaging them and preventing them from dispersing spores. So you just need to think about the species that may be already existing in your field. I think if you ever got a bit of land, a really good idea, which I spoke to a farmer about, that was a really good suggestion, is to have your land for a year. You know where the water pools, you know what species are popping up, you've got all the 4 seasons, and you get to understand your land. So you're more informed to make choices that I think will be better for the land, rather than just running and thinking, right, I'm going to plant loads of trees, because planting trees could also damage these wax caps. So just don't rush into it. Have a think. Birds of prey might be present, and they really like long, tussocky, messy grasslands. Maybe you bought a field and that's all your 1 acre field is, absolutely just full of like cocksfoot tussocks everywhere. That might be a heaven for birds of prey, and you don't want to just come in and mow it all flat one year, because the birds of prey are going to be really confused when the winter comes. So that's another consideration, birds of prey. And finally, wading birds. Nidderdale is internationally and nationally important for wading birds such as curlew and lapwing, oyster catchers. and they may be using your fields to nest in. So you need to ensure the timing of your activities coincide well with when the curlews are fledging from their nest, for example, because you wouldn't want to go into a meadow and mow it when there's curlew chicks still in there and killing them. So yeah, it's really important just to take a bit of time and understand what species may be already present in your grassland. So that's 3. Finally, we want to look at the ability to manage the land. So ongoing management is key. As I said, if you left a grassland, it would, and without any management, and it didn't have sufficient natural grazing pressure, it would ultimately become a woodland. So you need some sort of management. So do you have access? Do you have yourself a mower, or do you have access to it? Maybe you've got a neighboring farmer nearby who's got all the machinery and you want to strike up a relationship with them. So that's for mowing your meadow. Do you have access to livestock? So the aftermath grazing and the intermittent grazing over for the rest of the year once the meadow is mown. If you've not got your own livestock, then yeah, you want to strike an agreement with a neighboring farmer. Lots of landowners who I work with have that very relationship. And it's a bit of a, you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. It's kind of usually free, but not all the time, depending on the quantities of land you have. But yeah, just having good relations with neighboring land managers who have who have access to these resources. Yeah, so mowing, a mower, a baler, a harrow, and then some livestock. They're kind of like the key bits of equipment you need. So once you've considered all of those things and you've got a big tick next to them all and your land's suitable, and now it's what's next? Well, a big thing is choosing the correct seed. So it needs to be appropriate for your soil type. We've done the soil tests earlier. Now, I only mentioned the fertility of the soil, and then we'll just backtrack. The pH of the soil is important as well. If you've got a low pH, acidic soil, it could be too acidic, and that kind of can impact germination of seeds. That instance, you might want to add a bit of lime to raise the pH. I personally haven't actually done that on any of my projects before, but because we work in Nidderdale, they are acidic soils anyway, so it's not out the norm. So that's why we don't do it here, or I haven't had to do it yet anyway. But maybe you do your soil test and it comes out the pH is high, maybe around 8.5 on the pH scale. Well, you've got calcareous soil type there, and certain species won't live there. And you might need to decide on the seed mix depending on your pH. So that's actually really important. So your pH and your soil fertility when you're looking at your soil tests. So you can hand collect seed from your local area. It might be the neighboring farmer who's got really nice species-rich verdures. Or you might have a remnant little patch of grassland that's quite nice in your garden. You want to sow and you want to spread those and increase their abundance. So if you're going to collect it from your local area, I would suggest seeking landowner permission. And you don't want to take more than 1/3 of an area of flower. So if you find a 3 meter squared area of betony, you only want to take a 1 square meters worth of seed from there, and you only want to do that every 3 years, because you don't want to deplete you don't want to deplete the seed source that is there to allow that patch of betony in this example to continue. So you want to take 1/3 every 3 years, and that's what I do with my meadow restoration. We collect seed with a brush harvester, and I only collect 1/3 of a field every 3 years. So fields that I used for donors last year in 2025, I won't go back to them again in 2020 till 2028, and I'll be harvesting a different area than I did last year. You can purchase seed from local and reputable seed suppliers, and some options are Cumbrian wildflowers, Forest of Flowers in Hubie. Now, I've said local, and these are getting a bit further away with like Cambridgeshire and Nottingham. If you're choosing lowland meadow seeds and it's a lowland meadow, and because they're from a commercial seed supplier, I don't think that's necessarily as bad going a bit further afield, but I wouldn't be harvesting seeds myself from a field down in Cambridgeshire and spreading them up here. Because you might be bringing pests and diseases that a commercial supplier wouldn't have issues with, because they treat their seeds in different ways. And I've got an example seed mix here for a lowland meadow. If you were going to get it from a seed supplier, it's an 80-20 ratio of grass to wildflower seeds. I know this sounds obvious, but a grassland has a lot of grass. Even the most species-rich meadows might be 30-40% wildflowers and 60-70% grasses. The most species-rich meadow will not just be 100% wildflowers. Grasses are a really important component, and lots of invertebrates, actually, the grub stages, like the caterpillar stage, feed on grasses. So really important ratio, a really important component of a seed mix. And also, they're a lot cheaper than wildflowers, so you can buy more. You can bulk your buy out. So you've got crested dog's tail, sweet vernal grass, common bent red fescue. These are patch forming. They're not necessarily tussocky. They're delicate. They're not super competitive, and they've got really nice different flower shapes, flower heads when they grow. So really nice, good combination of four grasses there. And you've got your kind of general wildflower species such as buttercup and red clover. So these first five, buttercup, clover, red clover, ribwort, plantain, common sorrel, and yellow rattle, they're the big five that I really want to collect and spread onto another meadow. And then these other species below, like oxeye daisy, common vetch and selfield, these are brilliant additions if I can get them coming along with the seed I've harvested. But those first five are the ones I really want to spread because they do well establishing, they do well dispersing later on, and they're beneficial for of a whole variety of other organisms like pollinators. As you can see there in red, yellow rattle, that's a hemiparasite on grass, sometimes called the meadow maker, that plant, and it's really important for meadow restoration. As that grows, it does photosynthesize itself and create its own energy, but it does partly parasitize grasses, reducing the vigor of the grass, and that creates lots of little spaces for all these other species to start colonizing. So yellow rattle is really important. You can see it's quite varied on how much seed I've suggested at the bottom, 2 to 8 gram per square meter. Quite a lot of variation on numbers on the internet and online from different seed suppliers. I think if you've got bare ground, starting from bare ground, go 8 gram per square meter. If you're starting with an existing sward, so you're adding seeds into your lawn, you can go to the lower 2, 3, 4 gram per square meter. You can add too much and you're creating too much competition and you're spending money on seed that's not going to do very well. So you can add too much, but if you've got the funds, go into maybe, and you've got a grass sward already, tipping it up to 4 grams per square meter will get you good results. So our land's suitable, we're happy, and we've got a seed supplier or an area where we're like, there's going to be some nice seed to collect there, and we're rubbing our hands together, waiting for it all to waiting for the plants to go over so you can start harvesting. Before we sow any of that seed onto the ground, onto our field, we need to prepare the ground. So what actually needs to happen? Well, you've come in and you've removed your undesirable species. not completely eradicated, but reduce them if they're an issue. Then you've come in and you've mown and you've removed the vegetation. If it's a garden, you can just mow it and dump the vegetation in your compost bin or in your brown bin, or put it on your put it around your fruit trees as a mulch, something like that. As this picture in the top left, it's an agricultural scenario, so they're going to bale that to feed to livestock over the winter. You're mowing your meadow around about late July to early August. That's the general rule of thumb. Now we need to create bare ground. See in the bottom image there, we use a Valiant tractor with a springtime harrow. You can see in the very foreground of that picture the kind of bare ground we're wanting to create. So it's 30 to 50% bare ground, and it's not big patches of bare ground. It's interspersed throughout the sward. Seems quite a lot, you think, 50% bare ground, but it does soon cover back over the winter. But it's just really important. You need that bare ground so the seeds have contact with the ground and have contact with the light from the sun as well. Bare ground is a really important step. If you're doing it in a garden, use a metal tooth rake. That's what I did in my garden. Me and my partner did. We got a rake and we went over every inch of the garden. We pulled out loads of thatch, loads of springy turf moss, which probably everybody's garden's full of it. It's Rhytidiadelphus sclerosus. That's the Latin name. But that was covering any bits of bare ground where the plants. So probably got like 3 carrier bags full of just this moss. And it gave it a really good thinning. And then we spread our seeds over that. And after you've spread your seeds, you want to trample it into the ground. So the seed's in contact with the soil. In a garden, you can trample on the seeds with your feet. In a larger scale, you can use a roller. So that tractor, you could put a roller on the back of that and roll it. Or you can get your livestock in. Your livestock will just wander around the field and trample it in that way. So how do we... So yeah, in a larger scale, you can tractor or push mower. I'm a big advocate for scything, and you can scythe kind of medium-sized paddocks. And then with the harrow, you can have a springtime harrow. There's another one called a chain harrow, which is more like a big sheet, a big net of chains that you drag along, and it bounces along the surface and rips up tufts. I would say a springtime harrow is more sensitive than a chain harrow. So if you had target species like wax caps, you'd want to avoid those wax cap areas with harrowing. But I would use a springtime harrow just in case if you did go over any areas where the fungi were, you're not going to damage the soil too much and damage those mycelial networks. The ground's prepared, and now it's time to sow the seed. And I have jumped the gun here a little bit. So I'm just going to reiterate what I've said. So to germinate, it needs to have contact with the ground, access to sunlight, good soil moisture, and it needs to go through the process of vernalization. So you're going to get good contact with the ground if you harrow properly. You're going to get good access to the sunlight if you harrow properly. Good soil moisture, well, that depends on when you're sowing your seeds. Some people sow it. We normally do our meadow restorations in the Nidderdale National Landscape in kind of August. But we're working around the fact that we need to get onto fields once farmers have mown and baled their fields. We don't want that grass to grow again before we get on and sow our seed. So we need to kind of work around their calendars. But if in the best case scenario, you're doing it in October time, you're going to have good soil moisture because you're going to have had some rain by then. And the process of vernalization helps seeds break their dormancy and allows them to break out of their seed coating. And vernalization in some instances can be fire, but in this instance it's a period of cold and then a period of warm after that. So if you're sowing in October, you've got that period of cold over winter, and when spring starts again, you're getting a period of warm, and that's when your seeds are going to be able to break the dormancy and germinate. So it's important to spread evenly and at the right time of year. So it's best sown from September to November. But as I had a conversation with a landowner recently, they've bought seeds to be sown in springtime and it's worked then. I suppose with some seed suppliers, they will artificially vernalize their seeds by putting them through cold treatment and then heat treatment. And then this is just me thinking, but potentially that's why you can sow some of your seeds in springtime. When you say you could sow them now and you bought them in March, it's because they've artificially vernalized them by cold treating them. But that's usually the best time, September to November. The gold rain ratio, which I've mentioned earlier, of 1 to 3. So well, this is a different golden ratio. So if you're hand collecting, you want to take a third of an area every 3 years. Now, this golden ratio is how far the seeds you've harvested can spread. So if you've harvested seed from a 1 square meter area, that can be spread on a 3 meter squared area. So whatever the area you harvest, you can spread that on 3 times the area. As I mentioned earlier, it's about 2 to 8 grams per square meter for commercial seed. That's really, that varies wildly. And if you're going to a seed supplier, just follow what they've suggested on their seed packets. You don't want to chuck all your seed in the first bare patch. You know, even if you buy like 100 grams of seed, it doesn't feel like very much. So if you can mix it with some sand, that will help you distribute it evenly. So it's a good way to make it last a bit more. You can doing it by hand is completely fine, but you can get some seed spreaders are really useful if you're kind of a medium-sized area. And as I mentioned earlier, after spreading, it's really important to trample those seeds. You can do that by humans, livestock, or rollers. As I mentioned, the seed spreading, what we do on a larger scale is we put a dumpy bag or a tarp with our seed on the back of a pickup truck, and you drop the door of the pickup truck, and somebody sits in the back of the pickup truck and with a leaf blower blows the top of the seed pile in front of them, just like that picture there. You'd have a tarp with seed, and you've got a contractor who blows the seed off the top of that pile as a driver drives up and down in a grid, north to west and north to south, then east to west. So you've got a really good distribution of seeds. So we're going on to the ongoing management now. You've mown, you've removed the vegetation, you've created bare ground, you've sown your seeds, and you've trampled it all in. What next? So grazing your aftermath is really important. And the aftermath is kind of at the back end of summer when there's still a little bit of growth. After you've mown your meadow, it'll have a final little flurry in the last dying heat and light of the summer months, growing it to grow a little bit more grass. So you want to wait several weeks after you've done your sowing, and you can return your livestock back to the meadow. And you want to graze that aftermath for about 6 weeks, depending on how much regrowth you've got. And that helps further trample the seeds into the ground and further removes nutrients. So as I said, you've mown in August. Now, August to September it's still warm and like the back end of summer, so you're still going to get some good growth compared to kind of December to January, where vegetation growth is going to be drastically reduced. So removing this vegetation, this aftermath's pretty important. If you're on a garden scenario, it'll just be let your grass grow for 3 weeks, a month, then come and mow your garden and remove that mown vegetation again. It's just the same. You're just acting as livestock then. So so grazing the aftermath is a pretty important step. And for livestock, it's fresh, new growth, it's sweet, it's a nice bite. They're really happy to eat that and they'll happily munch on that all day. It's better than kind of taller, rougher, more fibrous vegetation that's starting to put nutrients back into its roots and out of the leaves. This is fresh, new growth that's putting all its energy into its leaves, and it's really good for your, especially for sheep that have a high metabolic rate. So that's immediately after sowing, but requiring your yearly management from then on. So say if you were going to do all your restoration and it's finished by October 2026. By November, you want to do your aftermath. So you go and mow it in a garden scenario, remove that vegetation. Now you just leave it over the winter months. You want to give it a mow kind of March time, so everything's on a level playing field, and then you shut up your meadow. And I think I've jumped the gun again. So let's stick with the bullet points. I've done them in this order for a reason, haven't I? You want to shut your meadow up from April to July. That's the main growing season. That's going to allow your plants to grow, flower, and set seed. And you're providing all the pollinators with a really good floral resource in that period of time. Then you take your hay cut from kind of mid-July onwards. I've said removing the vegetation once dried, and that lets the seed drop. If you've left it as late as kind of mid-August, I would think the seed's already dropped. But if you're doing it in your garden, mow your area and then shake your mown vegetation to get the seeds out. Then we're doing that aftermath grazing in late summer, trampling in the seeds a little bit more and removing a bit more of that nutrient. Then you want to intermittently graze with livestock for the rest of the year. So when the grass has grown a little bit more, get your livestock on. Once they've eaten it down, remove them. Maybe it's getting particularly wet. We're around like January time. You don't want to stick your livestock on your field as it might poach it. So you just leave it at that point. That intermittently grazing with livestock is really dependent on the weather. And this is what I've started with at the beginning, but I've left it at the end here. You want to aim for a short sward going into the following April. So if you think about it, after your last cut that you've done in November, your aftermath grazing, aftermath mowing, your grass is going to slowly, steadily grow over winter. And some species like yellow rattle don't actually start germinating till maybe late Feb. So all that growth that the grass has done over winter, which could be like 3 inches tall by this time, that's going to smother the ground, and the seeds are not going to have that really important contact with the light to help them germinate. So all your seeds you've sown the autumn before can be lost because you've not kept the grass short for the following spring when everything's starting to grow again. So it's really important to aim for a short sward going into the following April. And if you've not got livestock, you can take a late March cut and remove the arisings. In my garden now, yellow rattle flower is growing, and it started growing about 2 weeks ago. So I don't want to be mowing my grassland now because I could damage the yellow rattle populations. And as I said, that's really important for reducing the grass vigor because the yellow rattle parasitizes it. So it might be different where you're living, but I think for next year, what I'll do is I'll mow my lawn probably early Feb before all my daffodils and crocuses come up. Because we didn't do that this year, and we didn't want to mow the lawn because all the daffodils are in there. So it's dependent on your scenario. But yeah, aim for a short sward going into April. So these charts are from Plant Life, and just reiterating what I've said, from a large scale on the left to a small scale on the right, but both of them kind of let your meadow grow from April through to July, August. Give it a bit of a mow. That time, removing your mown vegetation, leaving it through the winter, and then just before your spring starts again, cut and collect your mowings or graze it with livestock to get a short sward. So you've done all the hard work, and it's important now to monitor your success because it's really important. What we always do is we do a vegetation survey before and then do another survey following the following years. And we're looking at, have new species appeared? Are the existing species that were there initially, have they spread more? Has the percentage cover of grass reduced and the percentage cover of wildflowers has increased? Brilliant. You might have lost some species. And what did you do different that year? Maybe you took an earlier cut just because you had to. You were going on holiday. You wouldn't be here to do a cut. You might have mown some plants that hadn't been able to set seed in time. So that's why you lost those species. So keep a note of all the species that you've got in your meadow from year on to year out, and you can assess the success. So in conclusion, and we've got about 10 minutes for questions after this, reducing nutrients is the very initial step. And if you've got high nutrients, there's no point trying to sow seeds. If you've got the time and the patience, reduce the nutrient levels. If not, you might want to just go plant some trees or an orchard, something like that, which have got biodiversity value in themselves. It's important to be able to have access to livestock and machinery. So whether it's your own or a neighbour's, you need to be able to access it. With the ground preparation, all those points, contact with the ground, contact with the light, good soil moisture. Creating bare ground is a really important step in that. So create 30 to 50% bare ground, essential. When you're harvesting seed, harvest it local. It's the right type of seed for your area then. If you're purchasing seed, make sure you've checked your pH. Are you calcareous? Are you neutral? Are you acidic? If so, choose seeds that are right for that pH. Yearly ongoing management is really important. You can't just sow your seeds in year one, sit back and relax and think your job's done, because it's not. But that's a beautiful part of meadow management. You have to be there year on, year out, and you change your decisions change the makeup of that grassland. So I think that's a beautiful part of it, rather than just sitting back. If you're a bit more of a lazy conservationist, I'd plant some trees. And observe your meadow, track its changes, see what's working, see what's not working, and change accordingly. It's about continued observation and just enthusiasm, really. So how can Nidderdale National Landscape help? Well, we've managed restoration projects, grassland restoration projects for over 15 years. And last year we restored 40 hectares of meadow across Nidderdale. Hopefully going to do similar or more this year. All of these services are free, so I can come and do soil sampling, vegetation surveys, provide you site-specific management advice, manage all the contractors to do the harrowing and the sowing of the seeds, and provide you ongoing support, all for free. Now, I can't do this for gardens, but if you've got a field, I'm working with community groups and parish councils on really small areas, but I just can't come to your back garden, is all. So if you own or manage a grassland and you want to manage it better for nature, then give me an email, or you can send me a message or give me a call. Will, our communications officer, will give an email to everybody, and it's got all this information on it anyway, so don't worry if you don't get it down. Right now, there's loads of resources, sheets available online, all on grassland management. These webinars are basically a carbon copy of those, but I know how different people want to learn. So all this advice that I've spoke to about today will be in this resource sheet. And stay tuned for more, because we've got more topics such as managing grasslands for birds of prey, wading birds, invertebrates, and grassland cheg fungi. Each one of those webinars, I've got guest speakers from like Bugs Life or the Hawk and Owl Trust, so they'll be able to give you real world examples of these management principles that I'll state. So yeah, stay tuned for those. In 2 weeks' time, on Monday the 13th of April, we're going to be doing grassland management for birds of prey with a guest speaker, Chris. He's brilliant. If you go on the Hawk and Owl Trust and on the YouTube channel now, he just wanders around kind of quarries talking about all the habitats, and he's absolutely brilliant. So I recommend doing that. You can get tickets available on Nidderdale National Landscape events page, or go to Ticket Source, search Nidderdale, and you'll find the upcoming events soon. It won't be up yet, but it might be up tomorrow or later on in the week. There'll be a feedback form on the sheet that Will sends out. Please get back to us so you can decide what content we're going to learn, what you want to learn about. And thank you very much for listening. And any questions? I've only given people 5 minutes. Apologies. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. I'm going to turn my light on because it's pitch black. And have we got anything in the chat? No, I don't think so. Has anybody got a question for me? Please just shout out or put your hand up. Silence. That must mean that I've provided all the information you need. Well, if there's no questions, I just want to say thank you very much, everybody, for attending the session. As I said, in 2 weeks' time, there will be another webinar, and there's loads to come. So every 2 weeks on a Monday for the next month and a half, 2 months, there's going to be a webinar, and it'd be great to see you all there. Stay tuned, and they'll be on our social medias.
Thank you, Joseph.
No worries at all. Thanks for coming.
That's okay. Bye.
See you later, everyone.